Hello and welcome to the Behind the Beat podcast with me, Katie Russell from Planet Drum Music School in London. Join us as we talk to special guests and industry professionals about all things music. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Behind the Beat podcast with me, Katie Russell. Today we are joined by a very special guest, Toby Davies, who works for the Trinity Rock and Pop, Trinity College London. I will let him take over and tell a little bit more about himself. Hi Toby. Can you tell me a little bit more about yourself? And you're a drummer, or you were a drummer, right?
Yes, I'm Toby. Thanks for having me, Katie. I think once you're a musician, you're always a musician. And we'll talk about it a bit later about sort of what I'm doing now and stuff like that. But yeah, so I grew up in North London, not far from where Planet Drum is. In Muswell Hill. And music was always at the heart of the family. And Mum was a music teacher, my sister was a music teacher, and so...
Oh gosh, it really was in the family.
It probably was, yeah. And so as a young boy, I started learning drums in primary school, started having lessons, and through the local music education authority, I was involved in things like the jazz band and drumming groups. I think I was about 14 when I gained the seat as the drummer in the Haringey Big Band. Joined the youth orchestra, so I've come from a slightly orchestral background as well.
Okay.
And I was very lucky that my involvement with those particular groups included various international trips to, Barcelona, Amsterdam, South Africa.
Wow.
So at a very early age, I was exposed to what kind of cool real world music, music.
What made
playing,
you pick drums in the first place?
I think my parents had tried to tie me down to a piano stool various times, and I kept getting up and just moving off.
Yeah.
I tried other instruments, which we might talk about a bit later. I don't know. It was one of those moments. I just sat down and I thought, yeah, I like this. This is for me. And there's no kind of rational explanation for it. It just became something that I did.
Yeah.
And I was very good at it.
Yeah.
So that makes it sort of slightly more enjoyable. And my teacher, when I first started, was absolutely incredible, and I still speak to him now. And he just basically sort of let me do what I wanted to do. There was no real pressure that you've got to learn this and you've got to learn that. It was, how do you want to move forward? And I've very much taken that into sort of my teaching approach and developed that. And again, we'll talk about that a bit later. But yeah, it just became something that I really, really enjoyed. It was one of the things in the week, you've a couple of things that you really look forward to. And my drum lesson for me was that. And then becoming part of the Haringey Big Band, the youth orchestra, the various drum groups, actually it became a massive part of my life, from being something where I just had a 1.5 hour lesson a week to suddenly every day I was drumming, doing something in some kind of group or even if it was just practicing. So, yeah. Yeah,
that's amazing. We've spoken to a couple of other people and drummers as well, and they've sort of said that their parents warn them off drums because it's loud and it takes up a lot of space. But it sounds like you've got a really musical family, so that sounds really good.
Yeah, I never had that at all. I was encouraged, absolutely encouraged to play. I was relatively young when I first got my first drum kit, and those days, a bit older now, but those days you didn't have the technology that you do now to have sort of decent electric kits, or if you did want a decent electric kit, it was going to cost you thousands, and now you can pick up a decent electric kit for not all that much. So no, we always had an acoustic kit in the house. I played it pretty much every day. And the neighbours were very understanding.
Good. That is another thing, the neighbours. Yeah, that's good. So you said you'd played some other instruments, or you tried other instruments?
I'd played other instruments. I learned the clarinet at one point. That lasted about 6 months to a year.
Yeah, it was the same as me.
I didn't hate it, but I think once I was introduced to the drums, everything else just took a sideline. I was always encouraged to play piano. And personally now I wish I had sort of done more of that. I encourage my own children to learn the piano alongside the instruments that they're also learning. I think to have basic piano skills for any musician is really important.
Yeah, definitely.
So I did learn the piano. I can still tinkle around on it. We've got a nice acoustic piano at home, and various parts of my course at college and stuff was the obligatory piano lessons once a week. So yes, and of course then at primary school I learned the obligatory recorder that everybody does at some point.
Love the recorder.
When they're at primary school. I think that's about it. Oh no, I did start to pick up the ukulele during lockdown.
Did you?
Yeah. I picked out a couple of Jason Mraz songs, which have about 3-4 chords in, and that worked for me. And I'll sit down and play along to those.
Yeah.
But having the time to sort of develop that further is,
Yeah, that's the thing. I remember I did the same as you, learnt clarinet for about 6 months to a year, but I had a bright purple one. And the school that I went to, everyone took the mick out of me because everyone had a really classy black, clarinet. I had a bright purple one. Everyone took the mick out of me, so I sort of stopped.
that would do it.
I know. It's silly, really, when you think about it, but that's kids for you, isn't it? So how did you then get from sort of playing gigs and then into teaching?
Well, straight away after college, I started playing with bands in studios, doing live work, studio work. Had my own bands, which I really enjoyed, and that took up a lot of time. And then just sort of kind of thought, like a lot of musicians, well, okay, I love performing, and essentially that's why I've learned my trade, but I need something to support this. So I started peripatetic teaching privately, one-on-one. I then became associated and got a job with a local music authority. So I was then going into schools.
Okay.
And then that just developed then to kind of ensemble teaching. And I would go in and deliver what we call wicket, whole class instrumental teaching lessons. And that would generally be on kind of percussive instruments, either djembes. So we go in, there'll be whole class sets of djembes or xylophones or stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I did that for a long time. And then I got a position at a local primary school. And for about 5 years, up until very recently, I delivered their classroom music provision from year 1 all the way up to year 6. I was lucky enough to be very well supported by the head, and I got lots of lovely instruments. So we had big class sets of djembes and tuned percussion instruments and samba sets and stomp style stuff. So that's, I transitioned from being a kind of, well, I guess it was a product of my own success. I started just on my own, teaching a couple of children that I knew, got working with a local music service, in and out of schools, and then I was offered a job to become this classroom music teacher at the local primary school, which I unfortunately stopped not that long ago for various reasons, one of them being how my job's now developed with Trinity, actually.
Yeah, and you still do a little bit of one-to-one teaching now?
I do kind of the one-off lesson. I do exam preps for students who might want it. Sometimes I've got, as you can imagine, doing what I do, I have lots of friends who are teachers and stuff like that. And if they've got to go off for a gig or something and they've got a student preparing for an exam, I might step in and do a Zoom lesson just so they've got, something to keep them, going.
And do you find that because you sort of said that your teacher sort of didn't force anything sort of upon you and sort of let you have, guide how you wanted to sort of learn the drums. Have you sort of taken on that approach as well when you do some teaching? Or what's your approach, basically?
I have, but I haven't. I mean, there was sort of free reign, but I mean, obviously, there are certain fundamentals that you need to learn. Yeah. So we learned through those kind of basic paradiddles and stuff like that, but it was very much once you'd learned those kind of basic fundamentals, it was how do you want to apply them, Toby?
Yes.
My teaching approach now is like that in terms of using these building blocks. And I think if you can get the basics right at the beginning, everything else will fall into place. Of course, you'll still have to work on stuff. Of course, you will just have to practice. But you will find that so much easier if you have those fundamentals, building blocks in place, those fundamentals. I think also one of my big teaching approaches is, and I think how everybody learns really, is to inspire. Yeah. I think if you could inspire students, you're going to make them want to learn. And a student who wants to learn is going to have a better outcome than a student who doesn't want to learn. I think that's one of the many reasons that I really love Trinity's rock and pop syllabus. It's the quality of the repertoire and the focus on the artist, sending the message to the student. You really like that song? There's nothing stopping you being that artist one day. Yeah. You can do in 6 weeks, in 6 months' time, or however long, once you've learnt this piece, you're playing the same as that artist. Yeah. You could be like that person. And it's that idea of just inspiring.
I think that's that's what we quite like about the rock and pop syllabus, is that, you know, if you've done a couple grades and you've learnt some songs, you've almost got a mini set list that you can, and the songs are really current, and you've got some really, you know, classic rock songs in there as well. So you've got a really nice set list that if you want to go and play a gig, you're like, well, actually, I can play that song.
Well, this is it. This is it. I mean, you know, from the very early grades, the initial grades where you're learning songs like Uptown Funk or We All Rock You or other songs like that. Now, there isn't a function band in the world that doesn't play songs like that, or Superstition and all of that. So from the very early grades, you're building up your knowledge of kind of those function bands. And we talk about a progressive route within kind of graded repertoire. And this is very much like that. I would say this whole syllabus is designed to create that kind of holistic gigging musician. Once you've done your grade 8 and you go back and you list all the songs that you've learned from your initial to grade 8.
You've got a set list.
You've got 2 or 3.
Yeah.
You know, you've got all the armor there to go out and start gigging, earning your bread and butter, which is going to then support. When it did it for me for many, many years, it supported the playing that I want to be doing myself. And I you know what? The teaching brought a lot to my playing on stage, and my playing on stage brought a lot to my teaching.
Yeah.
And the two, they don't need to necessarily be two completely separate things. I think there's a nice balance there to bring the two together, actually.
And I think the syllabus is really accessible, because I think when I was learning singing at school, for example, it was sort of, you either do classical or you do musical theatre. There wasn't really a rock and pop sort of option, not that my school offered anyway. And I was really put off by the thought of doing something quite classical. And I think a lot of people can find it quite intimidating. Obviously, a lot of people do choose that route. But I think when you're a beginner, I think maybe you think that maybe it's quite difficult, even though you end up doing similar sort of stuff in terms of technique probably anyway. But I think the rock and pop, they're really accessible. The ones that I use with my singing students anyway.
I think, the whole syllabus is very accessible. And look, it's not a syllabus that's there to replace classical teaching. That's not what it's about at all. It's about offering an alternative approach.
Yeah.
And like you say, some youngsters, and I think one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this syllabus is because I would have accessed the way of assessment and the type of repertoire in this rock and pop syllabus that's in other syllabuses that are out there.
Yeah.
So whilst I rightly or wrongly wasn't putting as much time into my rudimental studies and stuff like that for my kind of classical pieces, I was in the studio with my mates playing Smells Like Teen Spirit, Radiohead, Creep, that sort of stuff, Green Day. And if my teacher at the time said, Toby, you can gain an equivalent qualification playing these songs, and they're going to assess the rudimental studies in this way, i.e. embedding those technical elements within the structure of the song, I would have gone, oh my God, I would have been that ideal candidate for the rock and pop syllabus. And I don't know, you may disagree with me, Katie, but I can't believe I'm the only person out there like that. So that's what I try and say when I talk to teachers is, it's really accessible, but it's about giving the students a choice. Yeah,
exactly. It's sort of like, I wish I had this when I was learning, because I didn't really particularly enjoy my singing lessons and my studies and that. Just because it was, I sort of wish I had these songs and stuff available.
Yeah, I do.
So, hey, there we go. So talking a little bit more about Trinity now. So tell me a little bit about your role within Trinity, or how you got started within Trinity.
But essentially I got started actually by just running an exam centre for Trinity, which happened to be Planet Drum. We were talking offline just a little bit earlier. I think when I started for Trinity, I remember my first session in a spring weekend. I ran a session at 16 candidates, and I was very happy with that. And that was the spring session. And I think, now we're up to, there are exams every week at Planet Drum, aren't there? Yeah. So it's grown massively. And with rock and pop growing massively in the UK and Ireland, so as my role has developed. So I I previously looked after lots of centres, and I've just been appointed the National Development Manager for Rock and Pop in the UK and Ireland.
Amazing.
So, it's amazing. I get to spend my days talking to teachers and being in schools, which is lovely, because we mentioned about the teaching side earlier, that I'm not teaching as much, and teaching was something I was really passionate about. But alongside teaching, what I'm really passionate about is music education in general, and my role very much sits into the development of the rock and pop syllabus within music education in the UK and Ireland. Where does it fit? You know, who's going to access it? How do you access it? So it definitely involves my role, spending lots of time talking to teachers, running training sessions, you know, everything essentially.
So are you training them on the rock and pop syllabus and like how to deliver it?
It's not necessarily how to deliver it. We're regulated by Ofqual, so there are various things that we can and can't say in terms of, you know, we can't say this is how you get a distinction, for example, but we can say this is a good way that you might approach improvisation. You know, there are various musical things that we can get involved and say, and musical approaches. So it's not necessarily teaching them how to teach the syllabus, because that's not what we do. We provide the graded repertoire for people to take the exams, but it's about making them aware of the syllabus. It's about making them aware of the technical elements within the syllabus and how that can form a progressive route to music learning. In a line with the instrument that particular person is learning. I would also say that, you know, particularly the rock and pop syllabus is very versatile. Quite a lot of the time when I was teaching at primary school where I would use the graded repertoire books to do full class lessons. Just a really basic example, you take one of the early drum books, let's say Uptown Funk, and you start looking at basic rhythmical notation. So that's a line of crotchets. We're going to call that our hi-hat part. That's a snare drum line. That's the bass drum line. So they start to learn parts of the drum kit. You don't even need to mention Uptown Funk yet. But they start. So you've got three separate groups. Start piece it together. Oh, hang on a second. Let me play this song. The song starts playing, they start putting it together. So they're starting to read notation, they're starting to name parts of musical instruments, and they're starting to practically play. Just one example of how you can actually use those graded resources within a classroom setting as well as individual one-to-one graded lessons.
We've at Planet Drum, we sort of run, well, not during COVID obviously, but we started to slowly start running again our band workshops. And I think because Uptown Funk is actually in the singing book as well, it's quite good because we've got kids who can play it on the drums, and I've got some singing students who can also have a go at singing it in our workshops. So
absolutely,
it's really
also
good fun.
If you're doing sort of band stuff as well like that, the keyboard books are absolutely fantastic, because the keyboard books obviously supply the keyboard part. They actually have the vocal part written in, and they have the root chords for bass and guitar. So you've got your band resource there when you start. So it's just again, that's an additional thing. So as we talk, you can start to see how accessible and expandable actually those books are in terms of how you want to approach it, whether it's full class teaching, whether it's band teaching, or whether it is the kind of standard solo lesson working towards a graded exam. I
think what I also like is that with the singing, you have playback and improvisation. Is that similar with drums? I can't remember.
So for the rock and pop syllabus is 5 instruments: bass, drums, guitar, vocals and keyboards. Just really quickly, essentially you play 3 songs in your exam for a face-to-face exam, and then for a face-to-face exam you choose playback or improvising, and for a digital exam that's slightly different. We look at general musicianship for those marks, but it's the same. But
what I quite like is that you can pick either or. So with some of my younger students who are starting to do the grade 1 or 2, for example, they like to do the playback because they're really quite nervous with improvisation. But then as they develop and get a bit older, they start to get a bit more confident with their improvisation, and then they can switch and they can actually find that a little bit easier. So that is just another thing I quite like. You can pick both, either or.
I think, as a teacher, obviously, you teach both, but in an exam situation, you would choose the strength of the candidate.
Which is stronger.
But you're exactly right. And the thing about improvising, it comes up all the time. And it's the one part of the exam. I mean, personally, for me, I would probably choose improvising over anything else. But I learned for many years to just sit down at a kit with nothing and just play.
Well, I would pick improvisation as well. But obviously, some of my kids, they just get so, especially with singing, they just get so nervous to
I think that
just make something up.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, with improvising, you're not quite sure what you're going to get. And you don't with playback, but I'll explain what I mean in a minute. With improvising, you're definitely leaving it up to the candidate in the exam to decipher for themselves what they should be playing.
Yeah.
But with playback, which is this kind of sight reading, there's no arguing that is that note and you need to be playing that note, or that's a quaver and it needs to sound like this. There's no ambiguity there, is there?
Yeah.
So potentially some teachers, I think, maybe see it as as a safer option. But I mean, again, it's one of the massive advantages of Trinity's Rock and Pop syllabus is giving the student and the learner the choice and playing to their strengths.
Yeah,
so if your strength is improvising, choose that. If it's playback, sight reading, then you would choose that.
Exactly. So sort of over everyone knows what's happened over the last year and a half. How has that changed things for Trinity? Because now you've got these digital exams. So is that something you're hoping to keep as well as an option? Absolutely.
So we developed very quickly a digital syllabus when things started to go a little bit pear-shaped, shall we say, back in March, and that worked really well. That gave the opportunity for people who had prepared for a digital exam to take the exam that summer. We then, in November the 2nd, 2020, we launched our DGD, which we're calling our Digital Grades and Diploma Exam. And I think it is brilliant. It enables candidates to be assessed remotely. I think, again, it goes down to that the thing we keep talking about as accessibility and playing to somebody's strengths. So you'll find some students, they're going to, ultimately as teachers, we want students to get the best mark, don't we?
Yeah.
And, if somebody's going to get a better mark doing a digital exam than a face-to-face, then I'm sure as a teacher, you'd decide to go down that route.
Like I've got one student, for example. She's really lovely voice. Her technique's really good, but she's just very shy. And I think being in a room with an examiner would I don't think it would really work. So I think me and her in a room together filming it is just such a nice option to have, because it means that she can get her grade 2 qualification,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the other situations where I think it's really nice is if you've got a very, very young learner. I think it's a really nice stepping stone into what a formal music assessment looks like, because it is a formal music assessment. It's the same qualification. It's the same set of examiners examining it. It's the same certificate that you get. As you get up to the higher grades, it's the same amount of UCAS points that you get. It's exactly the same qualification. It's just delivered remotely. And for very young learners, so I'll give you a personal example, actually. So before lockdown, my son was 5. He was ready to take his initial rock and pop drum kit exam. Now, I appreciate there's some 5-year-olds who bowl into an exam room and sit down and just start playing. But I didn't feel as though my son would have been the person who would have done that. I think he would have been quite scared, nervous. And I didn't feel as though actually I wanted to put him in that situation. So we didn't. And then the pandemic hit. Trinity created this product. And 2 months later, he was recording his exam in his own room, on his own drum kit, with his dad next to him. And that enabled him to get his initial exam. And I'm very pleased to say he's not long past his grade 1. So he's done his first 2 exams as digital exams. And for him, that's really worked for him. Now, there'll be a point where he will switch to face-to-face. I do want him to have the opportunity to do both and the experience of doing both. But as a very young learner, and again, I've spoken to loads of teachers about it, and this is true. It is a lovely stepping stone for what a formal assessment for a music exam looks like for very young people, or for people who, like you say, one of your students is a little bit nervous. Yeah,
exactly. That's a really nice option to have. Okay, so I just want to ask one more question. So is there any new things coming from Trinity, projects or syllabuses that we can expect, or anything new coming up?
There's always loads of exciting stuff happening. And you're going to need to wait and see what that looks like. There's a couple of things that I can sort of tell you about now, and that's so most of our repertoire books are now available as ebooks. So maybe we can post somewhere on your next podcast or some sort of chat where you can
we can
download
put it on our
the ebooks
website as well. And
so you don't necessarily need to go and buy the whole book. If you
so it's like a digital copy.
Exactly. This is exactly what it's like. And you still access the audio using the Soundwise code that would appear when you check out of the e-store. always looking to add blogs and resources to our practice room element of the website. The practice room is a page for supporting resources for teachers and learners. So there's examples of improvisation tests. There's blogs by myself. That's where you can access the transposition tool for vocalists. We're always adding stuff onto that as well. So
okay, I don't think I've heard of that. What was that called again?
It's called the practice room. So if you visit trinityrock.com, and up near the top, you've got kind of an information bar where it says syllabuses, book and exam venues, and it says practice room. And if you go to the practice room, you'll see lots of really useful information. Like I say, blogs, articles. There's some really cool stuff around producers' notes.
Oh, that's
and
handy.
I'm a really big believer in fully understanding what you're playing and it not just being notes on a page. And I think it's one of the things I like about the performance notes in the graded books themselves, where it tells you who originally recorded the song, where it was recorded. Yeah, it's a little bit of information about the song. So it gives, again, it just straight away it gives it context. It's not just notes on a page. Somebody has written this. And probably at some point, the piece of music you're about to play has had a significant impact on people's lives for some reason or another. This could be why, you know, when it was recorded, you know, understanding all of those things, I think is really, really important. And if you understand that and you know that information about the piece that you're performing, I think you're going to be able to give a more empathetic performance.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I think with the online exams, for example, the digital exams, you sort of have to deliver that performance and, you know, musicianship almost a bit more to try and get it across in your online exam, don't you? So I think for online exams, it is really important, extra important to try and show that because you're doing it through a camera.
Yeah, I mean, the way I'd sort of describe, you know, performing to that is, you know, if you're at a live show and you're watching your favorite band, you get excited when they take their first step onto the stage as an audience member, and that's kind of what you want the examiner to feel. You know, it's an interesting one, and I think it is slightly different performing to camera than face to face. But it's about understanding the style of the song you're doing, which is what we were just talking about. Make sure that you're performing the right style. And, you know, that even comes down to the kind of the physical side of stuff. If you're playing a reggae track and then your next song is a grunge track, you're going to physically play those slightly differently. Yeah. Therefore, showing that you understand the style of the track. And that's the kind of key messages that need to come across to the examiner. And I think as well, just making sure that when a student is doing a digital exam, and I know it's harder to explain to younger people, but they need to understand it is still a performance. They're performing to the camera. There's still an audience there. You've got to pretend there's a stage there and there's an audience and, you know, someone coming to see you. And the best thing about it is I think 90% of the time probably there is somebody else in the room, you know, whether it's a teacher or parent or a guardian, you know, so use that parent as the kind of, or whoever it is, teacher, guardian, as the audience. Yeah. Use them to bounce stuff off. Definitely. Well, amazing. There's lots of nice tips in there as well for people listening. I just want to say thank you again. I will link lots of stuff in the description of the podcast and I'll put it on our website. But yeah, thank you so much for speaking to us today, Toby. Brilliant. Lovely. Thank you, Katie. Take care.